في القلب شعاع يهديني نور الإيمان سرى فيني.
The First Crusade was a monumental part in European history in particular. For the first time, the Christians of Europe and the Muslims of the East, for the very first time, were interacting with one another. Yes, in times of conflict, but it was a time of interaction where the English could actually learn about the Muslims. The Muslims could even learn about the Frankish Crusaders. Right now, the Crusade took place. The First Crusade is often referred to as the conquest of Jerusalem by the Christian Crusaders in 1099. The term Crusade is often just given by historians as a time period in which the Muslims fought the Christians and the Christians fought the Muslims. Now, what is the context behind the Crusades? What was the context behind what happened in 1099 when the Christian army of 60,000 princes and soldiers came and not only took Jerusalem, but created what is now called Outrima. The Outrima states the Christian kingdoms, the kingdom of Jerusalem, the county of Edessa, the principality of Antioch, and a number of other smaller kingdoms within the Middle East. Our timeline starts all the way back in the year 1009. At this point in time, the Fatimids are in control over Palestine, Egypt, parts of Syria. Now again, the Islamic world is fragmented at this point in time. The Abbasids, the powerful times that during of Harun Rashid, has all now been dismantled. We now got different dynasties in places in Iraq and Syria, in Iran, many different places were divided, and especially what some historians call in the 900s the Shia century, due to the power of the rise of the Fatimid Shia Caliphate. So at this point in time, the Fatimids have control over Palestine, and what happens is the ruler of the time, his name is Hakim ibn Amrullah. Now he's known as the Mad King. He did a variety of different. He has done a variety, of very, classical things that, and one of the most important aspects again is a reason to the crusade happening, is that he destroys a part of the Holy Sepulchre, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, a very holy place for Christians, and again for the Christians, it is a very holy place and a very important place. Obviously, we now move forward to probably about the mid 1100s now. We need to now know about the conquests in Spain, right? Spain have been in control over Spain for quite a very long time, and at this point in time, they've been divided. The Umayyad Caliphate of Cordoba has now been dismantled. Now the kingdoms of Spain have now split into 22 petty kingdoms called the Taifas. Now, what Pope Alexander II does at this time, this is like a dress rehearsal for the main crusade that happens nearly 50 years later in 1099, where he makes a proclamation that anyone that goes to the Iberian Peninsula, the Spanish Peninsula, to go fight the Muslims and retake what we now know as the Reconquista, again, you'll be forgiven. You're going to be rewarded with riches and penance in heaven, right? Forgiveness in the afterlife. So again, this is a sort of dress rehearsal for the Crusades. Now, a number of things take place. Luckily, in the Islamic Empire, we now have some sort of semblance of unity with the rise of the Seljuks in Iraq and Persia, right? We have, for example, Al-Parslan, right? And his uncle, Tughrul Bey, who's able to take Baghdad back under Sunni Islam, right? Before it used to be led by the Buyid Shias. And then Tughrul was able to take it back under Sunni Islam, and he proclaimed himself as the Seljuks, as the protectors of Sunni Islam. So you had Tughrul Bey, then you had Al-Parslan. Now it's a very important leader, because in the year 1071 something monumental happens. We have the Battle of Manzikert, right? A vital battle between the Seljuks and the Roman Byzantine Empire. Now this battle was vital because it opened up the plains of Anatolia to the Muslims, right? And it allowed us to go more towards the west. And essentially, what it did was it opened up for the Muslims to take more Byzantine land. And the battle was vital because this had never happened before. But the Constantine emperor himself, Romanus Diogenes, was captured. It's like comparing it to a modern day situation where where Rishi Sunak, for example, the Prime Minister of Britain, is being taken prisoner by the enemy. Right? This is how big of a deal it is. Right? So the Muslims are able to take more land under Malik Shah and Nizam al-Mulk, who is his advisor. However, in 1092, they are both assassinated by a group called the Hashashin, right? Which is an assassin order that again inspires the video games the Assassin Creeds. So in 1092, the Muslim Empire is again fragmented yet again, and the Christians see this as an opportunity. Right? See this as an opportunity. Alexius Comnenus, the Byzantine emperor of the time, right? He decides, okay, I need a bit of help to try and take back the lands that have been taken away from me from the Seljuks, right? However, I don't have the capacity because my power has been depleted because of the wars that have been taking place. Who can I go to for help? Now, this is where we need to know a bit more context behind the split between Catholic Christianity and Eastern Orthodox Christianity. Now, a lot of things took place, but in 1054, there was something called the East-West Schism. The Catholics have now declared the Eastern Orthodox Christians of the Byzantine Empire as heretics. The Eastern Orthodox Empire have accused the Catholics of being heretics. They are sworn enemies of each other. But Alexius Comnenus, he sees an opportunity, right? He's desperate for help. So he makes a call to the Pope. Send me soldiers, and in return, I'll give you riches. In return, let's do something to try and get back together. Let's try and ease that schism that has existed within us for the last 100 years. So he then Pope Urban II. He realizes this is a very big opportunity for him to not only increase his power, but make him famous, right? Because at this point in time, he's going through his own troubles. He's going through something they call the investiture controversy in Europe at this time, which is a battle between the monarch and the Pope. Who's more powerful? Who should decide what happens in a country and what doesn't? Should it be the Pope, the religious spiritual leader, or the monarch, the political leader? Now, this was a constant battle that that was taking place during his rule, and he realized maybe the Crusades is something I can use to gain more power. So in 1095, he makes a famous speech, very famous speech, and there are records of the speech that still exist today. There are 5 main accounts. One in the Gesta Francorum, the other by Fulcher of Chartis, Raymond Aguilar's are some examples of those speeches. And in those speeches, he proclaims that for every Christian, you do not have to be a soldier. You do not have to be a soldier. You can be any criminal, any lowly person that is in Europe right now that calls themselves a Christian. If you go to Jerusalem and fight and take back that land, you will be forgiven for any mistakes that you make in his life. You will be guaranteed heaven and penance and forgiveness, right? And he mentions it specifically to the criminals. He mentions it specifically to the farmers. He mentions it to the lowly poor people in the villages. Go and fight. You'll be free. You are going to be saved in the afterlife, right? Now, of course, this for the ordinary people is a very, very important and convincing speech. Initially in 1096, there's something called the People's Crusade, an army of about 6,000 unruly, unorganized peasants and farmers go and try and fight in the Holy Land. However, before they even reach Jerusalem, the Kilij al-Aslan of the Seljuk Turks is able to defeat them in battle, and they never come back again. However, 2 years later, in 1098, the princes of Europe are able to amass an army of 60,000, right? And that is the real threat. That is the real threat. Now, it is in this journey that they come from Europe, and a lot of these princes, by the way, are looking to seek for their own power. A lot of them, interestingly, are second-born children, because their older brother, what have they got? They've got their father's lands. They've got their father's lands in Europe. So what they decide to do is, I can find my riches elsewhere. Instead of I'm not going to find it in Europe, I'm going to find it elsewhere. So they go on the promise, not because of religious obligation, but they go for the riches. But you can definitely argue that most of the army definitely would probably have been convinced by Pope Urban's message. So on their way to Jerusalem, they stop off at Constantinople, where Alexius Comnenus is still a bit worried. Is he going to? Are they going to help him take Jerusalem back? Are they going to help him take Turkish land back, or are they going to try and keep it to themselves? Right. So he tries to constrain them, but there's too many of them, and they're a bit too unruly for him to deal with. So what ends up happening is that once they reach Constantinople, he tries to stop some of the leaders from going, but they're able to escape before he can capture them, right? So one by one, right, as the Crusaders, as the 60,000 army marches through Turkish lands, through the Muslim lands, they are first able to take the city of Dorylaeum. Then they're able to take this capital city of Konya, which was the capital of the Seljuk Empire at this point in time, right? Then they reach Marat. Then they reach Antioch, and the siege of Antioch in of itself was a year-long siege, in which many stories have come out from Antioch, where the Crusaders starved so much that they were willing to resort to cannibalism. Right? There are reports of cannibalism, not by Muslim sources, but by Crusader sources. So finally, after they're able to take Antioch, they move towards Jerusalem, and it's in Jerusalem that they finally able to take over in 1099. Now, where are all the Muslims in all of this? Where are the Muslims? There again, rather than fighting the Christians, they are fighting their own petty squabbles. Before the Crusaders come in, 3 months before the Crusaders come into Jerusalem, right? There was a battle between Iftikhar al-Dawla, who was one of the representatives of Seljuks, a Turkish warlord, if you might describe that, and the Fatimid Khalif, right? They were fighting over Palestine. They were more worried about who gets control of Palestine than the rampaging army that's just taken over Antioch, that's just taken over Marat, that's just taken over Dorylaeum, right? So they're more focused on that, right? Which obviously makes it extremely easy for the Crusaders to then come in 3 months later and take over the entirety of Jerusalem. And the accounts in of itself are very, very gruesome. The Crusader accounts in of itself are very gruesome. Raymond Aguilar, he says, what a wonderful sight it was. What a wonderful sight it was. As our ankles, blood was reaching up to our ankles to see the amount of people that died and the amount of people that were killed. They you know they were really happy. They were joyous, shouting, "This fault, God wills it." Everything that they were doing was because they believed that God willed it to them, right? And on the way to Jerusalem, they were able to capture many other cities as well as Antioch, as well as Edessa. After Jerusalem was conquered, hence the First Crusade was over, they were able to establish the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the Principality of Antioch, and the County of Edessa. Now, these became strongholds within the Middle East, so were surrounded by Muslim countries, by Muslim states. They were surrounded by Damascus and Aleppo on the east, surrounded by Egypt on the west, surrounded by Mosul in the east as well. Yet, despite them being surrounded, and they were worried. The Crusaders were worried that what's going to happen if the Muslims try and fight back against us. But was there any response initially? Was there any response? No, there wasn't. And I'm going to tell you one story, that came out of the First Crusade, is again extremely, extremely startling. After the massacre in Jerusalem, right, where Ibn al-Athir mentions that nearly 70,000 people were killed. 70,000 people were killed. Many of them, he mentions specifically, imams, ascetics, people of knowledge, right? Why is it that the Crusaders were targeted them? Because they knew that it was the scholars that could have an impact later on. And this is exactly what happens. Luckily, there are some survivors that come out of Jerusalem. They're able to escape before they were killed. They reach Damascus. They take a 3-week journey to Damascus, right? And in Damascus, they meet the one of the muftis, the main muftis of the city, Abu Sayyid al-Harawi. They meet him in the Grand Mosque of Damascus and tell him of the stories that took place in Jerusalem, right? They, very, very vivid and very, very graphic. Abu Sayyid al-Harawi is extremely worried. So what he does is he immediately takes this group of people and they immediately go to Baghdad, the home of the Abbasid Khalif, right? Who at this point, remember, is more of a symbolic Khalif, has very little political power, but at least he can try and do something. So they reach Baghdad, right? And it's the month of Ramadan, right? But most importantly, they arrive on a day where everyone is celebrating. Everyone's having a party because the Khalif is getting married to his second wife, right? Now, obviously, it's very, very difficult for him to get hold of the Khalif at this point in time. So the next day, what he does, in order to get the attention of the Khalif to get to be in his presence, he says he gets a bowl of food, and this is during Ramadan, right? So he gets a bowl of food and starts eating it in front of everyone. And everyone's wondering, why is he eating? This is a mufti, right? Why is he eating in front of everyone, in the month of Ramadan? And they start creating a crowd around him. And he says, like, the only people I'm going to talk to is the Khalif himself, right? The only people I'm going to talk to is the Khalif himself. And they go to and he's able to, meet the Khalif. And in the history books, mentions something so important. Like, he lambasts the Khalif. Like, why are you sitting here in luxury? Why are you sitting here in dishonor, right? In your gardens of flower, right? In your beautiful gardens, in your beautiful palaces, you are sitting here in luxury whilst the ummah is slaving away, and the ummah is being killed in Jerusalem, right? And he speaks to the Khalif in this manner, right? He's very, very clear and out front in front of the Khalif. And the Khalif, obviously, he's a young man at this point in time, probably in his early 20s. Again, a symbolic leader, not someone that hasn't much political power. And he promises that he's going to investigate it. But he knows deep in himself that no, there's not much we can do at this point in time. This was the state of the ummah at this time. We were so divided at this point that we couldn't even protect the blood one child, one woman, one man that was living at Jerusalem at the time. For the blood, for one drop of blood of a Muslim is more important than all the wealth in this world. And Alhamdulillah, there were some signs of resistance after that. The first signs of resistance come in Aleppo. In Aleppo. In Aleppo, people hear about the story, what's happening in Jerusalem. And again, they're very angry at the Muslim leaders of the time for not doing anything about it. Why has no one said anything? Why has no one done anything about it? Again, very similar to our situation today. And is the shuyukh again that are able to, unite the people and show sign of some sort of resistance to convince the leader to try and do something about it. The leader of Aleppo at this time was a man called Ridwan, who Ibn Athir calls him a miserly man, right, a mischievous man, guy that only cares about himself and nothing else, right? They're able to, as to become friends with the Crusaders, he even allows the Holy Cross. He even allows a cross to be put atop one of the big masajid of Aleppo as a sign of friendship with the Crusaders. So not only does he refuse to say anything, he creates a friendship with them, right? The people of Aleppo get extremely angry at this. They revolt against him, and they're able to take this cross down. Again, we have those first signs of resistance. Then we have later figures like Maudud. And again, all of these efforts, right? The first major battle that takes place that the Muslims are able to win is the Battle of the Field of Bloods in 1119. And those were the first signs of resistance. But however, there were still a lot of obstacles to get through. For a lot of these leaders, the ones that had good intentions like Maudud and, a couple of other leaders as well, unfortunately, there were many obstacles that they faced in front of them. Maudud himself, for example, the winner of the Battle of the Field of Blood, he is later assassinated by the Hashashin. When we look at this time period of the Crusades, the very first, about 20-30 years after the First Crusade, we see that Muslims are fighting Muslims more than they are fighting the Crusaders, right? These leaders like Maudud, these leaders like Imaduddin Zengi, they were more focused on trying to unite the Muslims. They were more focused on fighting fellow Muslims than they were with the Crusaders. And this happened all the way up to Salahuddin Ayyubi, right? Salahuddin was only able to amass an army in 1185, 2 years before the Battle of Hattin, right? Before the Third Crusade. Because for those 80 years, probably 10 out of those 80 years, 90 years or so, were fought in the fighting the Crusaders. The rest of it was trying to unite the Muslim Ummah, was trying to unite the different factions within. And again, it was the role of the shuyukh, it was the role of ordinary people like you and me that also had a part to play in it. That is the story of the First Crusade. And as after Maudud and Imad al-Zengi, we have the rise of Nuruddin Zengi and the Second Crusade, in which they try and take back some of the lands that the Muslims took.